Hi, I'm Kent. In this video we're going to try two different gloss glaze recipes. One of the first glazes I mixed up from scratch is actually this one here. This is a cone 5/6 base glaze that fires glossy. I've used this for a variety of different pots and done things like put mason stain in it to get colored. I am out and I want to mix up another batch. I also have a recipe from Old Forge Creations by Joe Thompson that I haven't tried for a gloss glaze. I want to mix up a batch of that as well. First up is the glaze from my pottery store. One of the advantages of this glaze is that it's been all mixed together already. So for a gloss glaze, I can use this straight out of the bag. So I've already measured up some water. Next up is to measure out the dry glaze itself. Glazes have some dust in them that you don't want to breathe, so I'm going to put on my respirator. Just like this. There's still a bit of a cloud of dust in the air. So I've got the dry ingredients and the wet. I'm going to put the dry on top of the wet. All right, that's much better. All the dust is out of the air. And the glaze is fully submerged. I'm going to use my immersion blender to mix this all up. All right, that's looking good for an initial mix. I'll set this aside and let it hydrate for a while before I actually use it. Next up will be the glaze from Old Forge Creations that I need to measure out all the ingredients for. Let's go ahead and do the first 5 glossy base. I went ahead and printed out the instructions. I decided to do the same size batch. This is 1.5 kilograms. Whereas for the last glaze that I bought pre-mixed, I just had to dump out that amount that I wanted and then add the water. This one I actually have a bunch of different ingredients to measure up. So these are the first 5 ingredients, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's bentonite for a 6th ingredient as well, the much lower percentage. So this recipe came off glaze day and went ahead and put in the amount. So I need to go and measure all of these amounts of these different ingredients. To do that, I have my scale. I have a little tub I'm going to measure into so I can get the right amounts. Then I have a tub I'll dump all the dry ingredients into. So nepheline cyanite is the first one. That's this one here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mask up and we'll probably just zoom through this. Measuring isn't the most exciting thing. All right, that's all the dry ingredients for the gloss glaze. I've got dusty stuff everywhere and do a quick wipe down. Next up for the glaze is water. Let's pour the dry onto the wet and mask time again. All right, just slowly dump this on. Give this a quick stir with the head of my immersion blender here. All right, all done with the mask. This is at least wetted down, so it means there shouldn't be more dust flying through the air. And I'll mix it up a few other times, but you don't need to see that. While we're at it, let's go ahead and do the matte recipe from Joe as well. The ingredients are all the same, so it should be pretty straightforward. For good measure, I just let these glazes sit overnight and mix them up again. I think we should be good to go. I have several pots here that are ready to be glazed, so let's go ahead and do a coat of glaze. First up is the base glaze from my pottery store. Next, we'll do the first 5 glossy glaze. I should mention that all these pots were from a previous tester. I was experimenting applying slip to my pots. This is just normal clay, and this has, and the top here has some slip with some black mason stain. So we'll see how the clear glaze goes on both of these. Last one is the matte glaze. All right, I'm gonna let those dry and then I'll do the inside off camera. Here are all the pots. First up is the glaze I got that was pre-mixed, so all I had to do here was add water. This one here is the glossy glaze, where I had to measure out each individual ingredient. And this one's the matte glaze. These two glazes here were the first time mixing them up. I think the gloss worked just fine. The matte looks like it has challenges. I think my glaze application had some issues, so the glaze isn't adhered quite properly, but I don't think this is the right surface finish for this glaze. So it definitely warrants some more investigation. Both of the clear glazes basically behaved as expected. They have slightly different surface finishes. This one winds up a little bit more kind of, I don't know, bubbly. There's a texture inside the glaze that you can see. This one maybe has some too, but it's much deeper and much finer. So what are some of the trade-offs between making these glaze? Well, one of the obvious trade-offs is just being able to measure things out. It's quite possible that the matte glaze I messed up by measuring something. I'm going to go back and look at the footage and see if I caught an error or not. For all of these, you need to worry about dust. Measuring out just one thing versus measuring out a handful of things makes a big difference for that. The overall quantities are about the same, but there's lots more moving around, and the dust was in the air much longer when I was mixing things out individually. Another difference is cost. You're paying for the pre-mixed glaze. It is, I think, about double in price relative to mixing it yourself. I have another video on breaking down different costs of different glazes, so you can check that out if you're curious on that front. And the last major difference is being able to actually control the glaze. So with this glaze, I really don't know what's in there, and if I wanted to make modifications to it, it'd be really hard. I'd really be just making a bunch of experiments with trial and error. With these glazes, like so this one, I don't think it turned out quite right. I can go back and make sure that I adhered to the recipe, or I can start making tweaks to it so that it does what I want it to do. Likewise for this glaze. There have also been some other glazes made using this base that Joe has put out, so I could go and follow one of those as well and expect to get somewhat similar results. So those are some of the pros and cons of mixing up glaze from powder and doing it either with a pre-bought mix or doing it yourself and measuring out all the individual ingredients. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.